At 2:17 a.m., the house had a different weight to it. Not silence. Real silence never exists, but a kind of heavy stillness, like the air itself had decided to stop moving. The hum of the refrigerator downstairs was muted by distance. The clock on my nightstand glowed a dull red, numbers bleeding softly into the dark. My phone lay face down beside it, warm from where I'd set it after checking the time for the third time in 10 minutes. Everyone else was asleep. I knew that the way you know when a place belongs entirely to you for a moment. No shifting footsteps. No pipes knocking. No distant cough or door hinge. Just me, my breathing, and the faint smell of dust and old wood that always rose at night, as if the house exhaled when the lights went out. I was awake because sleep wouldn't come. The kind of sleeplessness where your body feels tired, but your mind keeps circling the same empty thoughts. The ceiling above me looked darker than usual, the shadows deeper in the corners. Moonlight crept through the thin gap in the curtains, painting the floor in pale stripes that stopped just short of my bed. Outside my window was a narrow side yard. Gravel, a patch of dead grass. The fence beyond that, old and warped, separating our property from the trees that leaned inward like they were listening. During the day, it looked harmless. At night, it became something else entirely. An undefined space where sound traveled strangely and shapes felt unfinished. I had just started to drift, that fragile moment where thoughts blur and time loosens, when I heard it. A sound from outside. Not loud, not sudden. A soft crunch. Gravel. My eyes opened instantly. I stayed still, listening. The house didn't react. No alarms. No barking dogs. Just that same thick quiet, now stretched tight. Then it came again. Another crunch. Slow. Deliberate. Footsteps. They weren't rushing. They weren't pacing. Each step was spaced evenly, the gravel shifting under weight that understood exactly where it was going. The sound came from beneath my window, close enough that I could imagine the stones pressing into a sole, rolling slightly before settling back into place. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. My breathing slowed on its own, shallow and controlled, like my body had decided noise was dangerous. The footsteps stopped. The pause was worse than the sound. In that silence, my mind filled the space with possibilities. A stray animal, someone cutting through yards, wind dislodging something loose. But animals don't stop like that. Animals don't stand still and listen. After a few seconds, too many seconds, the footsteps started again, this time closer to the wall. The sound changed slightly, the crunch duller, heavier, as if whatever was out there had shifted its weight toward the house. I became acutely aware of my window. The thin glass, the cheap latch, the way the curtain barely touched the sill, leaving a narrow gap at the bottom where moonlight slipped through. The footsteps moved once more, then stopped directly beneath that gap. Right outside my window, I could smell something then, faint but wrong. Damp earth, old leaves, a hint of metal, like rust carried on cold air. It seeped through the tiny cracks around the frame, mixing with the stale indoor smell of fabric and dust. I stayed frozen, eyes locked on the curtain. My heart thudded so loudly it felt impossible that it wasn't audible outside. I waited for the sound of breathing, for scraping, 4 fingers against glass. Instead, there was nothing. No movement, no sound, just the sense of presence. That feeling you get when you're being observed, even without proof. The air felt denser near the window, like something occupied the space just beyond it, blocking the night itself. Seconds stretched. My muscles ached from stillness. My mind screamed to move, to reach for my phone, to turn on a light, anything to break the moment. Then slowly the footsteps began again, not moving away, circling. Each step traced a slow path beneath my window, gravel shifting back and forth in a measured rhythm. One step, pause. Another step, pause. As if whoever, or whatever, was out there was mapping the room through sound alone. I noticed something then that made my stomach twist. The footsteps never overlapped. No scuffing, no dragging. Just a single set of steps, perfectly spaced, perfectly controlled. They stopped again, this time closer than before. The curtain moved. Not pulled, not brushed, lifted, just slightly. Enough for moonlight to change shape on the floor. Enough for the fabric to tremble, as if displaced by something passing close beneath it. I stared at the gap, my vision tunneling. The darkness beyond the glass felt deeper than the night around it, like a hole cut into reality. I couldn't see anything, no face, no silhouette, but the sense of being seen intensified, sharp and undeniable. The smell grew stronger. Damp, rotting leaves. Something old that had been outside for a very long time. I don't know how long I lay there, locked in that moment. Time lost meaning. My body felt distant, like I was observing myself from somewhere near the ceiling. Then, without warning, the footsteps resumed, this time moving away. Crunch, crunch, slowly retreating across the gravel. Toward the fence, toward the trees. I didn't relax. I didn't move. I listened until the sounds faded into the background noise of night, until even my heartbeat began to feel normal again. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. When I woke up, sunlight filled the room. The house sounded alive again. Pipes, distant movement, the ordinary comfort of morning. For a moment, I convinced myself it had been a dream, until I opened the curtain. The gravel below my window was disturbed. Not scattered, not messy, compressed. Clear impressions where someone had stood for a long time, directly beneath the glass. And pressed into the dirt beneath the window frame, just barely visible in the shadow, were shallow marks, parallel lines, evenly spaced. Like someone had rested their fingers there, waiting, listening, knowing exactly when I was the only one awake. The night shift always had a smell to it. Old coffee gone bitter on the hot plate, dust baked into carpet fibers by decades of fluorescent light. That faint metallic tang from the vending machine down the hall, like warm coins and ozone. I'd worked enough overnights to recognize it as soon as the doors locked behind the last day employee. The building would settle then, exhaling, becoming something hollow and watchful. The office sat on the edge of an industrial park, surrounded by a wide, cracked parking lot and a line of trees beyond that. During the day, it felt unremarkable. Beige walls, smudged windows, a place people passed through without thinking. At night, though, the glass reflected too much. Every light inside turned the outside into a dark mirror, layered with shadows that didn't quite belong to me. Around 1:40 a.m., the building entered its quietest phase. The air system cycled down, leaving behind a low hum that seemed to vibrate inside my skull. My keyboard clicks sounded louder than they should have, each one echoing faintly off cubicle walls. Somewhere deep in the building, pipes ticked as they cooled, irregular and arrhythmic, like someone tapping a fingernail against metal without any pattern. That was when I noticed the shape in the parking lot. At first, it registered as nothing more than vertical contrast against the darkness. A darker piece of dark, standing where there shouldn't have been one. My eyes slid over it and moved on, my brain filling the gap with something reasonable. Light pole shadow, trash bag, maybe a sign I'd never noticed before. But a few seconds later, something tugged at the back of my attention. That primitive sense that notices when symmetry is wrong. I leaned slightly toward the window. The parking lot lights cast pale yellow circles on the asphalt, illuminating oil stains and faded paint lines. Between two of those light pools, just beyond the nearest row of spaces, someone was standing. Not walking, not shifting weight, just standing. The distance flattened details. I couldn't make out a face, only a tall silhouette facing the building. Arms down at its sides. Head tilted just enough that it felt intentional. The kind of posture that suggested awareness. I waited for movement. A step. A sway. Something human. Nothing happened. The glass felt cold under my fingertips as I rested my hand against it. I became aware of my own reflection layered over the scene. My face pale, eyes tired, hovering over the figure like a ghost trying to line itself up with the body. Time stretched. Seconds grew heavy. I looked down at my monitor, forced myself to blink, then looked back out. The figure hadn't moved. The longer I stared, the more wrong it felt. People never stand that still. Even statues seem to shift if you watch long enough. There's always something, breathing, balance, the subtle betrayals of muscle and bone. This thing gave me nothing. The parking lot was empty otherwise. No cars pulling in. No headlights on the road beyond the trees. Wind nudged a loose plastic wrapper across the asphalt, its faint skittering sound drifting up to the glass. The wrapper moved. The tree branches moved. The shadows from the lights trembled slightly as moths passed through them. The figure did not. A pressure began to build behind my eyes, the kind that comes from staring too long into darkness, trying to force detail where there is none. My shoulders tightened. I became aware of how loud my breathing was, how shallow. I checked the time on my screen. 1:47 a.m. When I looked back out, the figure seemed closer. Not by much. Maybe one parking space nearer. Maybe my imagination, trying to justify the fear blooming in my chest. I searched the ground beneath it, looking for a shift in shadow, a change in proportion. Everything else aligned. The light poles, the cracks, the oil stains. The figure was undeniably closer. Cold spread along my arms, raising goosebumps beneath my sleeves. I tried to reason it away. Perspective trick. I strain. Fatigue. Night shifts play tricks on you. I'd heard that my whole career. Still, I didn't look away again for a long time. Minutes passed. The building made its quiet noises. The hum of electricity. The faint buzz of lights. Somewhere far off, a truck groaned along the highway, its sound stretched thin by distance. The figure remained. At 2:03 a.m., it stood just at the edge of the nearest pool of light. Close enough now that the outline sharpened. Clothing hung straight down, unaffected by the breeze. The head was angled slightly downward, as if looking up at the windows through its brow. I became acutely aware of how exposed the building was. All glass at the front. No security desk after hours. Just me, a badge reader, and doors that suddenly felt very fragile. The air smelled stale, tinged now with something else. Ozone maybe, or the imagined scent of rain that never came. My mouth felt dry. Swallowing made my throat ache. I leaned closer, squinting, trying to find a face. The light revealed just enough to deny me clarity. No features. No eyes catching the glow. The head looked smooth. Not featureless, exactly. More like detail refused to resolve, sliding away every time I tried to focus. A strange thought crept in then, quiet and unwelcome. It wasn't looking at the building. It was looking at me. The realization hit with a physical weight. My reflection lined up perfectly with the dark oval where a face should have been. Every tiny movement I made, my breath, the tilt of my head, felt mirrored, acknowledged. At 2:11 a.m., the figure moved again. Another impossible shift forward. No step, no change in posture. Just closer, as if the space between us had been edited, frames removed from reality. My pulse thudded in my ears, drowning out the building's hum. I became aware of how thin the glass was, how easily it could shatter, how the silence outside would swallow any sound I made. The security camera monitor sat dark on the desk behind me. I hadn't noticed it earlier. The feed should have been running. I turned slowly, every muscle tight, and saw nothing but static. Gray snow crawling endlessly across the screen. When I turned back to the window, the figure stood directly beneath the nearest light. For the first time, I saw its shadow. It stretched toward the building, but not toward the light source. It angled wrong, skewed as if cast by something behind it that I couldn't see. The shadow touched the base of the glass. A low vibration thrummed through the window frame, subtle but real. Not a knock, not an impact, more like pressure, like someone leaning close enough for their presence to push against the air itself. The figure's head lifted. I couldn't see eyes, but I felt them, a focused attention that scraped along my skin. The sense of being measured, cataloged. Time stopped behaving normally. My watch ticked too loud. Each second dragged, stretching thin, threatening to snap. My thoughts felt distant, muffled, like they were happening to someone else. At 2:17 a.m., the parking lot lights flickered. Just once. When they steadied, the figure was gone. The space it had occupied felt wrong, like a missing tooth in the darkness. The shadow lingered a fraction longer than it should have, then dissolved into nothing. I stood there long after, heart hammering, listening to the building breathe. The night smelled the same as it always had: coffee, dust, electricity, but now there was something under it. A memory of cold, of being seen. The rest of the shift passed without incident. Dawn eventually thinned the dark. Cars returned. Noise crept back into the world. But even now, on every night shift, I find myself checking the parking lot. And sometimes, just before 2:17 a.m., I feel that pressure again, like someone standing very still, waiting for the space between us to disappear. Everyone in the house was asleep when I heard it. Not a sound that snapped me awake. Not a bang, not a crash, not something obvious enough to justify panic. It was softer than that. Subtle. Persistent. The kind of sound that slips through a half-dream and gently pulls you toward consciousness without ever fully explaining itself. Breathing. At first, I thought it was my own. The slow rise and fall in my chest, the faint whistle that sometimes escaped my nose when the air was dry. I lay there, staring at the dark ceiling, counting seconds between inhales, trying to sync the sound with my body. It didn't match. The breathing was off rhythm. Too wet. Too deliberate. Each inhale dragged slightly, as if passing through something narrow or damaged. Each exhale lingered longer than it should have, trembling at the end, like the person, or thing, making the sound was savoring it. The hallway light outside my bedroom door was off, but the night light near the bathroom leaked a thin amber line beneath the doorframe. That strip of light cut across the carpet, illuminating dust, lint, and the faint outline of footprints that had been pressed into the fibers earlier that day. The breathing came from that darkness beyond the door. I didn't move. Not because I was brave, but because every instinct in my body told me that motion would acknowledge it. The air in my room felt heavier than it should have, stale and faintly sour, like old fabric left too long in a closed space. My skin prickled, goosebumps rising along my arms despite the warmth under the blanket. Everyone else was asleep. I knew that with certainty. My parents' bedroom door was closed at the other end of the hall. My siblings' door was shut. The house always settled into a particular stillness after midnight. A low hum from the refrigerator, the occasional tick from cooling pipes, the distant hiss of traffic far beyond the neighborhood. This breathing did not belong to that stillness. It was closer than the end of the hall, closer than the bathroom. It sounded like it was just outside my door, angled low, as if whoever was there wasn't standing upright. I focused on the details, the way fear sharpens perception against your will. The faint rasp, like air moving over something rough. The subtle gurgle deep in the throat. The pause between breaths that lasted just a fraction too long. Long enough to make my heart stumble as I waited for the next one. When it came heavier. The carpet outside my door shifted slightly. Not a step, more like a slow redistribution of weight. Fibers brushing against fibers. I imagined something kneeling there, its face close to the floor, head tilted just enough for one eye to align with the gap beneath the door. I pulled the blanket higher without realizing it, the fabric whispering softly as it slid over my chest. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the silence. The breathing paused. Every muscle in my body locked. Seconds stretched. My ears rang. I became acutely aware of my own heartbeat, pounding in my throat, each pulse threatening to betray me. Then the breathing resumed, slower now, almost patient. The smell reached me next. It was faint at first, barely noticeable beneath the familiar scent of laundry detergent and old wood. Damp, earthy, like rain-soaked soil clinging to fabric. It drifted into my room in thin waves, carried by air that felt colder than before. That was when I understood something was wrong in a way I couldn't rationalize away. No one in my family smelled like that. The breathing shifted again, moving laterally, sliding along the length of the hallway. The sound dragged across the space, never growing quieter, never retreating. Just repositioning, exploring. I squeezed my eyes shut, not to sleep, but to avoid imagining what shape might be casting that sound. Images crept in anyway, elongated shadows, limbs bent at unnatural angles, a chest that expanded too much with each inhale. The floor creaked. Not the sharp crack of a step, but the low, tired groan of wood slowly bearing weight. The sound came from directly in front of my door. The breathing stopped again. The pause felt intentional. The doorknob didn't turn. The door didn't open. Instead, something brushed against it. A gentle contact. A subtle pressure, as if a forehead or shoulder had been pressed there, testing the boundary. Dust drifted down from the top frame, barely visible in the thin line of light beneath. The breathing resumed on the other side of the door, closer than it had ever been. Each exhale now carried a faint vibration through the wood, a low tremor I felt more than heard. My stomach twisted. My mouth tasted like metal. The urge to scream clawed at my chest, but fear smothered it before it could reach my throat. I listened. Minutes passed, or hours. Time lost its meaning as I lay there, cataloging every shift, every sound. The breathing never rushed, never faltered. It lingered, steady and assured, as if it knew exactly where I was and had nowhere else it needed to be. Eventually it moved on. The sound receded down the hallway, not fading so much as relocating, until it was swallowed by the darkness near the stairs. The smell thinned. The pressure against the door lifted. The house slowly returned to its usual nighttime noises, as if nothing had happened at all. I didn't sleep after that. Morning came with pale sunlight and ordinary sounds. Footsteps, cabinets opening, life resuming its familiar rhythm. The hallway looked normal. No marks, no footprints, no sign of anything out of place. But when I stepped out of my room, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The carpet directly in front of my door was flattened into a shallow oval. The fibers pressed down as if something had been resting there for a very long time. And even in the daylight, with everyone awake and moving around, the air near my doorway still smelled faintly of damp earth. I haven't heard the breathing again, but some nights, when the house is quiet and everyone else is asleep, I catch myself holding my own breath, just to make sure the sound I hear in the darkness is actually mine. I remember the exact feeling of the steering wheel under my palms. Worn leather, slightly sticky from years of heat and sweat. The dashboard clock glowed a dull blue, 12:41 a.m. The road ahead stretched empty, a two-lane ribbon cutting through trees that leaned inward like they were listening. The air inside the car smelled faintly of old coffee and dust, the kind of smell that only shows up after midnight, when you've been driving too long with your thoughts turned inward. The radio was off. I'd turned it off miles back. At that hour, any sound felt intrusive. All I wanted was the low hum of tires against asphalt, the steady vibration traveling up through the seat and into my spine. The headlights carved out a narrow tunnel in the dark, illuminating reflective paint and the occasional glint of wet leaves scattered across the road. Outside that tunnel, everything felt infinite in watching. I was about 15 minutes from home when I saw the figure for the first time. It stood on the right shoulder of the road, just beyond where the light began to fade. At first, my brain tried to soften it, maybe a mailbox, maybe a broken signpost. But as I drew closer, the shape held together in a way objects don't. Upright, narrow, too still. The headlights washed over it, and I caught the impression of a human outline facing the road, arms hanging straight down. No movement, no reaction to the car, no raised hand, no step back. I felt a prickle move across my neck, like cold breath slipping under my collar. The moment passed quickly. I drove by, eyes locked forward, pretending I hadn't seen anything unusual. In the rearview mirror, the road behind me swallowed the shoulder in darkness again, leaving nothing behind to confirm what I'd seen. I told myself it was someone waiting for a ride, someone drunk, someone stupid enough to stand that close to the road at night. The trees grew denser as I drove on, their branches knitting together overhead. The smell of damp earth seeped through the vents, heavy and green. The road curved gently, familiar enough that I didn't have to think about it. My shoulders relaxed. The tightness in my chest loosened. Then I saw it again. This time, the figure stood on the left side of the road. That alone should have been impossible. There were no side roads, no driveways, just woods. Thick, unbroken woods. The figure was closer now, close enough that my headlights picked up texture instead of just shape. The outline looked wrong. Too tall, too thin, like someone stretched upward without adjusting the rest of their body. The head was slightly bowed, chin angled toward the pavement. Still no movement. As I passed, a strange detail registered. The surface of the figure didn't reflect light the way clothes or skin should. It absorbed it, dull and matte, like a shadow pretending to be solid. The air inside the car felt heavier, warmer, as if the engine heat had suddenly doubled. My mouth went dry. I swallowed and tasted metal. I didn't look in the mirror this time. My hands tightened on the wheel until my fingers ached. The hum of the tires grew louder, or maybe I was just listening harder. Every few seconds, my eyes flicked to the speedometer. I was going faster than I realized. The road markers slid past in a steady rhythm that felt too slow, like the night itself was resisting me. I tried to ground myself in details, the faint crack in the windshield, the way the left headlight cast a slightly wider beam, the subtle vibration when the tires crossed old patchwork in the asphalt. Normal things, real things. That's when the smell changed. It wasn't sudden. It crept in gradually, threading through the stale coffee scent. Dampness gave way to something sour, like wet fabric left too long in a basement. I adjusted the vents, but the smell stayed thick and clinging, coating the inside of my nose. I rounded a long curve, and the road straightened out ahead. The The figure stood directly in the center of the lane. I felt the moment before panic set in, that brief, suspended second where the brain refuses to accept what the eyes are reporting. The headlights locked onto it, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. The proportions were unmistakably human, but wrong in subtle, unsettling ways. The legs were too long, the shoulders too narrow, the head tilted at an angle that suggested curiosity rather than awareness. It didn't step aside. I swerved without thinking, the tires screaming as they crossed the center line. The car rocked violently, suspension groaning, before I corrected and brought it back under control. My heart hammered so hard it felt like it was pushing against my ribs from the inside, trying to escape. The smell inside the car spiked, sharp and rotten, then slowly faded as I sped past. For a moment, all I could hear was my own breathing, ragged, uneven, loud in my ears. I forced myself to check the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. No figure, no movement, just darkness and the faint reflection of my own headlights disappearing into the trees. I laughed once, short and breathless, the sound cracking in my throat. Adrenaline burned through my limbs, leaving them shaky and weak. I didn't slow down. When I finally turned onto my street, the familiar shapes of houses and streetlights felt unreal, like a stage set hastily thrown together. I parked in the driveway and sat there with the engine running, hands still gripping the wheel, waiting for my heartbeat to settle. That was when I noticed the smell again. Not inside the car this time, but outside, drifting through the open window. Damp, sour, old. At the edge of the streetlight's glow, near the bend where the road curved out of sight, something stood perfectly still, watching. I didn't wait to see it a fourth time. The glow of my phone was the only clean light in the room. Everything else was muted, drowned in shadows that felt thick, almost oily, like they clung to the walls instead of resting on them. The house was quiet in the way it only ever is after 3 in the morning. Not peaceful, not restful, but hollow. The air smelled faintly of dust and old fabric, the kind of smell that settles into a place where nothing has moved for hours. I remember the exact moment I checked the time, not because it was important, but because my body already felt wrong before I even looked. My thumb brushed the screen, waking it up, and the numbers appeared too bright against the dark. 3:03 a.m. The light reflected back at me, faintly illuminating my hands, my knees, the edge of the bed. I was sitting there with my back to the open doorway, shoulders slightly hunched, the phone held low in my lap. I hadn't realized how still I'd been until that glow made me aware of my own breathing. Slow, shallow, careful, as if making any more noise might disturb something. That was when I saw it. At first, my brain refused to process what my eyes were picking up. Just a shape. A distortion in the glass. The screen wasn't acting like a mirror, not fully, but the black areas between the icons were glossy enough to catch a reflection. Behind my own faint outline, behind the blur of my shoulders, there was something else. A face. It wasn't sharp, not detailed, just pale enough to stand out against the darkness behind me. Too close. Close enough that I should have felt breath on the back of my neck, or heat, or movement. But there was nothing. No sound. No shift in the air. Just that presence, hovering where the doorway should have been. I didn't move right away. My body locked up in that quiet, instinctive way it does when fear hasn't decided what shape it's going to take yet. The room felt colder all of a sudden, or maybe I just noticed it. The smell of dust seemed heavier. The silence pressed in harder, like it had weight. The face didn't change. It didn't blink, didn't lean closer, didn't pull away. It just stayed there, slightly tilted, as if it were studying me. The longer I stared at the reflection, the more wrong it felt. Faces aren't supposed to look like that. Not because it was grotesque or distorted, but because it was incomplete. No clear expression, no visible emotion, just hollow attention. I became painfully aware of how exposed my back felt, how vulnerable the space between my shoulders suddenly was. My skin prickled, every hair standing up, my muscles screaming at me to turn around, to confirm it, to make it real or make it go away. I didn't. I kept staring at the phone. The light from the screen flickered slightly as my hand trembled. That was when I noticed something else. The reflection wasn't matching my movement. My shoulders shifted just a fraction, but the face behind me stayed perfectly still, perfectly centered, as if it existed independent of me. My mouth went dry. My tongue felt thick. Swallowing took effort, and the sound of it echoed in my ears far too loudly. The house responded with nothing. No creaks, no settling noises, no distant hum of pipes or electronics. It was as if the building itself was holding its breath. I forced myself to breathe again, slow and shallow, terrified that deeper breaths might give away the rhythm of my body. The idea that it might be listening didn't feel like imagination. It felt like knowledge. The face began to clarify the longer I stared. Not by moving closer, but by my eyes adjusting, by my brain filling in gaps it probably shouldn't have. The skin looked smooth in an unnatural way, like it had never known light. The eyes were open, but wrong, too dark, reflecting nothing, like holes punched through the image. I thought about the doorway behind me, about the empty hallway that should have been there, about how I hadn't heard a single step, a single shift of weight, a single sign that something had entered the room. The absence of sound felt deliberate, as if silence itself were being used. My phone suddenly felt unbearably bright. The light hurt my eyes, but I didn't dare lower it. That reflection was my only warning, my only proof that I wasn't alone. I realized then how fragile that little screen was, how easily the battery could die, how quickly the display could go dark. The thought made my chest tighten. The face tilted slightly. Not much, just enough to notice, just enough to confirm that it wasn't a trick of light or exhaustion. The movement was slow, careful, controlled, like it was aware of how terrifying even the smallest change would be. My heart began to pound, each beat heavy and loud in my ears. I was sure it could hear it now. The pounding, the panic, the way my body was betraying me by existing too loudly in that quiet space. I felt a sensation at the back of my neck then. Not touch, not pressure, just awareness. The unmistakable feeling of being observed from inches away. My spine went rigid. My shoulders crept up toward my ears without my permission. The air behind me felt occupied. I wanted to close my eyes. I wanted to throw the phone away. I wanted to turn around and face it, or run, or do anything that would break the moment. But fear rooted me in place, holding me perfectly still. The reflection started to blur. Not because it was fading, but because the screen was dimming. The brightness slider dropped as my phone tried to save power. The face began to dissolve into the darkness, piece by piece, retreating into shadow as the glow weakened. Panic surged through me. My thumb fumbled at the screen, smearing fingerprints across the glass as I tried to bring the light back. The reflection flickered in and out, distorted now, warped by my frantic movements. And in that distortion, the face appeared closer. Too close. The features stretched across the glass, no longer confined to the background. The darkness behind me felt like it was leaning forward, collapsing the space between us. The smell of dust was joined by something else, cold, stale, like air that had been trapped somewhere deep and unopened. The screen went black. The room vanished. I sat there in complete darkness, my phone dead in my hand, my back still turned to whatever had been behind me. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before, pressing against my ears until they rang. I don't remember how long I stayed like that. Seconds, minutes, an eternity measured only by my heartbeat and the slow burn in my muscles from not moving. Eventually, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. It was still there, steady and patient, right behind me, no longer needing the reflection to be seen.